The seminar group are really delighted to welcome Debbie Frearson to give us a talk on volunteering today. Debbie is an experienced heritage professional who's currently working as a festival coordinator for the Council for British Archaeology, doing the Festival of Archaeology, and is our first practice-based PhD here at the university. So Debbie, take it away. Thanks.
Hi everyone. Can't you just give me a few hours? Volunteers are an underestimated agency. So for those of you who have screen readers, the images do have alt text and you should be able to use live captions from your meeting. I'm always interested to see how my Leicester accent brings the narrative up, and have fun with the alt text because I did as well. So just a caveat at the start of this seminar, I'm at the start of my PhD in practice and I was asked just a couple of weeks ago to give this seminar. So what I hope to achieve is to show you the wide range of people that volunteer, from professionals both inside and outside the sector to individuals with no experience who just volunteer for a myriad of reasons. I'm going to explore the underestimated value, benefits and challenges of participation. Most of it is through anecdotes and case studies, and that includes upskilling and inequalities from grassroots, heritage organisation and academic perspective. I have had to give myself a serious edit though, because I've been volunteering for 23 years, so there's quite a lot of backlog there. And when I'm talking about intangible, I often mean underestimated as well. Got it. So this is how it's going to go today. We're going to look at academia, a volunteer profile, some benefits and challenges, and then some of the value. So my academic thought process is in the present, and I know there's a strong bias that needs curtailing, but I've got quite a storytelling nature. So my seminar is about the encounters and stories that have been told to me, and I want to tell you about the people with a capital P rather than volunteers in an abstract agency. I'm just sort of briefly going to touch on academia because I'm aware in lots of the stuff that I've been reading that academics are always wrestling. They're wrestling with discourse and questions of how heritage professionals and researchers can facilitate heritage in the UK without exploiting volunteers or devaluing professionals. So the dilemma at the start of my PhD is, what am I talking about? Am I talking about volunteers, heritage, professionals, knowledge? At the moment, neoliberalism is everywhere in academic papers this week, but volunteers are always seen in the abstract as an agency and as a whole, and some of the papers devalue the enthusiasm and the benefits of participation. So my thoughts may change in 5 years when I finish, and I can reflect on this from another perspective, and life in hindsight is wonderful. Unfortunately, it's recorded, so people will know what I thought. At the moment, theoretically, I'm leaning towards a social network theory, and a lot of this came from research I did about people joining a community and using that sense of belonging to thrive. Technically, using something called middle range theory, it's less abstract and it's linked to observation, but sometimes the individual is also ignored in this. So there's going to be a sort of network analytics, but as you'll see when I talk later, the network of community volunteers is vast, and it may be that I have so much information that it becomes uninformative. A lot of this is used in the health sector, so I can't own it. But if I look at some of the papers used in the health sector, if I swap the word archaeology with health, I'm going to piggyback it wherever I can. So I thought it would be beneficial because a lot of the cohort that I'm with at doing PhD are not UK based. So I thought I'd look at the volunteer sector in the UK. So we have lots of people who volunteer for a myriad of reasons, as I've said. You have professionals like ULAS, for example, who a lot of them give their unpaid time in heritage for a wide range of engagement. They give also professionals, the Young Archaeologists Club, lectures, talks, community groups like the Hallerton Group, which I'll talk about later, or chair committees. They give peer reviews, they share their knowledge and experience, and also meet new people. And I'm not forgetting here the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists and their special interest groups, which rely on volunteers to help run and inform the sector. Early career people who are professional, but I've split them out for a particular reason, as you'll see later on. They're looking to gain wider experience where they cannot get it through employment. They're expanding their knowledge and experience and continued professional development, and they're looking to network as well. And then you've got students looking to build up a portfolio of knowledge that can't be gained through academic means and network. And if you look at the master's students here who are distant learning, how are they going to network? One example is Kirsty Hartlett from this school, who's studying castle typologies, and she's recently become the secretary for the Council for British Archaeology East Midlands, in a position where she benefits from the network. Because when she spoke to me and said, are there any volunteering opportunities? And I said, what is it that you want? She says, I want to talk to lots of people about castles. I went, go to the East Midlands CBA, they've got loads of them there and they never stop. So that's benefiting her and them. And then we're looking at academics. Again, peer review, volunteering, very much like the professional. And I'm not saying they're not professional, I've just split them out. And they often do unpaid voluntary work, projects like field schools, research and outreach. And then we have outside the sector professional, people who do pro bono work in the sector in order to get a network for their business, but also because they think it'd be a great idea to share their work. A lot of altruism and pro-social behaviour, which is action that benefits from other people, or retired police who coordinate Heritage Watch, advising and delivering anti-crime initiatives, or a BBC podcast producer who wants to enable more grassroots content and young people. And then I come to people in the community, and I will be reading this out, totally undefinable, a massive range of participant backgrounds, all manner of professions, and I'm going to list them from the groups I'm involved in. Surveyors, teachers, vicars, surgeons, artists, factory owners, florists, publishers, electricians, dentists, nail technicians, physiotherapists, secretaries, farmers, land drain specialists, comic makers, builders, Elvis impersonators, soldiers serving an axe, chefs, nurses, mechanics, wind turbine engineers, civil engineers, unemployed. They're all looking to gain knowledge and share their own life experience and skills, all with a focus on heritage and the wider projects and local. And when I was looking at all these, we have a really great cohort of people under Professor Sarah Scott, she's our supervisor, and I was talking to Shan because Shan from China was telling me about volunteers in other countries and in China. And in China, volunteering is government-led on projects. There's work experience, which is just short time as guides. There's no heritage volunteering. And while I was trying to see if there were cultural differences in other countries, I suddenly realised, actually, I'm the only person in my friendship group and my family who volunteers. No one in our sector has anyone who I know who volunteers. So I spoke to other people I know, anyone in your family volunteers? Also, why are you doing it without paying? So then I looked at other friends. I asked the mechanic, anyone in your family volunteer? So whilst I was thinking I could compare cultures, I need to look at my own because it's not really a thing outside this sector. And so state control over volunteering or not control of volunteering has nothing to do with it whatsoever. So if we go back to the academic abstract, I just thought I'd show you what the government say, Historic England. So they specify that groups and volunteers should not be homogenous and that you should have a clear idea of who you're engaging with and why. So I'm going to touch on a few examples of community groups and individuals. The slide I'm going to use, I used quite a few years ago at the CIFA conference and nothing's changed. And what these groups don't show you is the hidden network. Nearly every single one of the people in these groups is a volunteer. They're also members of other groups. There's a huge capillary action of knowledge and contacts, and it's amazing. I've seen it in action, from grief counselling on site to owners of plant and equipment, to people who've been studying a subject for years and offer you their unpublished research. And this resource is underestimated. And when you ask for volunteers and register them, you don't know the backstory or what you're going to get or how you're going to use it. 2 local community groups. I could probably replace this with a lot of groups in the UK, but these are the ones that I know. So one is the Hallerton Fieldwork Groups, probably 23 years old now. They developed out of the Community Heritage Initiative. They found the Hallerton Hoard, and a lot of their work is in Hallerton Tin Hat Museum, but also in Market Harbour, and the Rutland History and Records Society, of which none of the groups take on projects which professionals would be paid for, such as geophysics or consultancy. If advice is needed and the museum or professionals can get paid for them, they just refer them on. Members of both groups contributed significant time to the Rutland Roman Villa site. They are both typical of a Leicestershire and Rutland heritage group in that they have a charity commission constitution, insurance, they have GDPR documentation, and I've chosen these because they're professional, maybe one's got in their output, that they manage by very experienced volunteers. But I wonder if to start a community group, how professional does a volunteer need to be? Is it taken for granted that as the skill set are there, it's like an overestimation of what that skill set is rather than an underestimation, because it's quite hard to be in charge? Both groups have benefited from lottery funding. They've both been active in the prevention of heritage crime. At Hallerton, when they found the hoard, there was a group of illegal metal detecting people who were going night after night. The whole village volunteered. There were people lying in hedges, old ladies on 2 a.m. till 3 a.m. shifts, writing down number plates of people who were in the village. The days when, in the days when shops didn't use barcodes, they used to use a label on a bottle and say Smith's store. Well, unfortunately for the illegal metal detectors, they drank beer and left it under the hedge where the people were lying. And so they were able to see where they bought the beer from. So a charabanc of the villagers went out to where this shop was in Norfolk. I'm going to say Norfolk, I've just made that up just to protect. And they saw a van with a metal detecting, and it matched the number plate that Mrs. Smith had taken at 2 a.m. in the morning. So they reported it to the police. And then the Rutland History and Records Society, and then do you want to see if that works? Do you want to ask? Hello. Is that working? Right, we'll try again. So then we move to the Rutland Local History and Records side. Just tell me if it doesn't work. Yeah, okay. So we got a call at Ridlington that a developer was digging out an ornamental garden pond in the Bronze Age hill fort that formed part of his garden. So as a society, we wrote to Historic England and we chased and chased and chased. And it took 2 years for them to speak to the owner of the site and make them subject to investigation. And as a result, ULAS were employed to do we called it a hostage trench, but they had to then go in the garden and investigate. But by then, all the spoil had been taken away. But that hours of volunteering and making sure that all the paperwork was right for Historic England, that's not mentioned anywhere. So both of these groups are really passionate about protecting the local heritage. They learn the law, they understand when to provide commentary to government initiatives. On all the portals, often you get results that are saying, oh, these are NIMBYs in England, that means not in my backyard. but it doesn't show the skills that these people have presented in order to protect their heritage. They support local museums and add to the public knowledge of heritage in the area through talks, publications and university engagement. But outside of the few academics or professionals, the value of their contribution is unrecognised and their skills underestimated. And when it comes to other initiatives to which they could contribute, they're missed out. They're providing a sense of place on their own, and there is a lack of capacity, skill and communication within larger organisations to engage directly, perhaps a peer-to-peer mentoring scheme with other people. And then I'm going to come on to the East Midlands research framework. Most of these groups, not just these two, but they often deposit their work that they do with the historic environment record that's run by each county. It was only at a conference when I was talking to the East Midlands research framework person, they don't use that. They use a totally different method. So for in Rutland, for example, our archaeology group, they are finding Paleolithic finds of national importance. On the East Midlands research framework, they want to find sites which are of national importance prehistorically, but they don't know about ours because we've been putting it on the correct site. It just doesn't match with what's there. So there's a complete underestimation of what volunteers can provide. And also what works for one group doesn't work for another because the people themselves are totally dynamic. And then we'll look at an individual. So this is Elaine and Clive Jones, who were sadly killed in a car accident a few years ago. And while digital engagement is amazing, there's some fantastic groups there, I just love this quote from Elaine about let's not have any interwebby thing here, Debbie. We want a proper cup of tea and let's get down to business. And we go to their house and they bring out all their work. And Elaine was a qualified archaeologist who took one of the early courses of Leicester with some of the hierarchy of ULAS. And she self-published field walking because nobody would publish because she wasn't an academic. And then, this was years ago before housing developments came around Effingham. And then, when the housing development did come 20 years later, she lodged her reports with the Historic Environment Record, and they were able to see that there were Iron Age sites, there were Roman sites, there were medieval sites. And suddenly, she's influenced archaeological interventions through planning, which employed over 20 people. But where's the reference to Elaine in any of this? Her husband Clive was an OBE for geology, and most of his work was in Malaysia. And when we did the strategic stone study for Rutland, we thought it would be dead easy because Northampton's was in quite soon, but the last one was 1875 by Judd, so we were a little worried until Clive went, come for a cup of tea. He says, 30 years of research, here's all of Rutland for you. And we credited him in that. But I said, why haven't you given that anyone before? He said, I didn't really like any of the others. So it worked really well. And that's why talking to people and going to see them often works. They both mentored and trained over 50 people, and the university had a direct benefit from that because after we've been out field walking and finds identification, many of the people then went on to do postgraduate courses, but that value to the university economy is lost. And their self-published works are used by government and professionals, and they add to that knowledge without acknowledgement, I would say. So now I'm going to flip it and look at an organisation value. So I'm the Festival of Archaeology Coordinator, as you know, and we use volunteers regularly and we try and upskill as many as possible. So we have 5 strands. The Festival of Archaeology, to which I coordinate. We have moderators, not 9 to 5, they can work in the middle of the night, mostly students. A couple of hours a week, so people register their events on our website, but we have to moderate it to make sure there's nothing awful in there, some pictures, and some people just, I've had some people say, no fat people because we can't get down a bridge or something, so we take all that out. And a lot of the event organisers as well are volunteers, but there are a lot who are professional. And sometimes we want to encourage as many people as possible to hold an event, no matter what your skill set is. But some people don't have the right language to use, so we have to try and use a moderator to change behaviour, is what I'm going to say. And in casework on planning, there's volunteers who work digitally throughout the country, looking at the joint amenities societies. When you put in a planning application, you might go by the Victoria Society or somewhere like that, and they all have volunteers. The Young Archaeologists Club as well have leaders and assistants, many of whom are volunteers, not all, because some venues pay for their leaders, but a lot of them are. Many of them are parents of the children in there. And then we have British Archaeology. People write articles to British Archaeology and submit them voluntarily. Some might be paid. And finally, we have the Archaeological Achievement Awards. Now, we're paid as a secretariat and a facilitator, but the judges volunteer. What we have when we work is clear terms of engagement. We say how many hours this is going to take you, what the role, what you can and cannot expect. We call it a role description, not a job description. And when you look on the museum's jobs page that lists many jobs, and you see a job and then you see it's voluntary, it's not a job, it's a role because you're volunteering. We always review the engagement to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And I've put safeguarding in red because when we were running the festival last year, part of the registration for an event is that you have to have a safeguarding policy and risk assessment. And a lot of grassroots people know what this is, and not a lot of larger companies do either, to be honest. So while this is professionalising volunteers and it's seen as a conflicting narrative, some accountability is required. And to help with that accountability, we try to upskill. We provide tools and guidance as well as clinics, and people apply to volunteer and they give references as well for us. So we have a central event listing, which we help people deliver using the right language and trying to change it to appropriate behaviour. Online and in-person delivery, how to act, how to moderate it, how to make sure there's not any inappropriate language. We run digital clinics at lunchtime and evening with set things, and we also help with event promotion to make sure, again, the language is right. And we have evaluations so that they can say to us whether we're doing it right or not. We've worked with the Enabled Archaeology Foundation. I've just put one of the guides here because often you have people who want to do a tour of their village and they don't think about drop curves or whether people can hear them or any safety whatsoever. So we try and make it as simple as possible without reels and reels of information, but also make it appropriate. What I wanted to do was to help with accountability and everything else is to look at how value is measured. Of all these people that I have mentioned, the one thing that I've chosen is the Heritage Lottery Fund. There's various well-being models, but I just wanted to focus on money really. If you look at low-level grant funding model, which in most cases it's monetised, the Heritage Lottery Fund look at how much they are giving, and then they ask for a lot of skills in hours. So if they give £1,000, the volunteers have to produce £1,000 worth of labour in kind. As a professional with a skill set, it's £50 an hour, a skilled is 20 and an admin is 10. And I'm not sure if that's right. And I want to add that this formula is copied. It's found its way to lots of other funding bodies as well. And they require a number of volunteers and hours, and it doesn't matter what calibre, you just have to say you've matched it. And when a project ends, the National Trust, I was talking to some colleagues there, there's no post-project legacy. And when they were funded, once the fund ends and the project ends, that's it, it's cut off. Nobody finds, did you go on to university and help the economy that way? Did your depression end? Did you meet new friends? Did you use your network and get involved in a profession? Nobody really measures that. I'm going to use this sheet. It says there, Community Heritage Initiative in Leicestershire in Rutland. That ended some years ago, but the legacy is a skilled set of people who influence heritage today. So I'm kind of going to go backwards and do a regressive evaluation. And in fact, one of the people from there was the one who figured out that the Bronze Age hill fort was being destroyed. Without the skills learned at that Community Heritage Initiative, we never would have done it. And then the Young Archaeology Club, conversion to university places. Again, the underestimation of volunteers putting people into university. YAC influence a lot of people, and whilst they measure volunteer hours and have a list of people internally that they know, I don't really think nationally outside it's recognised at that influence. And this goes for youth engagement in other museums. I'm just talking about YAC because that's the company I'm there. So I think it's time for another equation to be in the mix rather than just monetising hours. If universities can produce a widening participation for young people into adulthood, which is where they look at children in primary school and they measure them up to university and beyond to see what interventions of education has helped them achieve more, why can't you do that for volunteers? I don't think that it's a homogenous thing, and I'm going contradictory to what I'm saying. And I have been told that it'd be like herding cats because all these volunteers are all uncontrollable. But it's not, it's a logical process. And before I went into heritage, I worked in other industries. And there's something called a CRM, it's a customer relations management. It's already in use by the NHS, for example. I was with somebody the weekend in Edinburgh, and they've created this new database, which is effectively a customer relations management. And they're looking at maternity services from proof of pregnancy onwards up to when the person becomes a teenager. Why can't you do that with volunteers? Why can't you measure what their skill set when they were started, what interactions they've had, and how they've gone on? Obviously, not secretly, they have to have permission. But who should facilitate this? I realise it could be run at low-level organisation, but I don't think it would work on a project-by-project level. I think this needs to be on a funder level to be of any value. It doesn't have to be bespoke. When I worked a few years ago, we just used something called Really Simple Systems, and others are available, but it does the same thing. But if nobody goes with my thing, I'm going to look at volunteer value with money. So I'm going to use monetary value, and I'd like to thank Tori King for helping me with these stats. So this is how projects are measured sometimes. So on Richard III, they looked at the monetary value for the media and also what that brought to the city. So how do they manage it, and what it contributes to the economy? So let's look at the 59 million. How many volunteers contributed to that 59 million? You've got 10 volunteers on the dig site and absolutely loads on the outreach because they were trained as students and people, and they filtered out. But their unpaid hours and skills that they learned are not really recognised in any equation. So that 59 million, if you are going to do equation of volunteer hours versus output, would be quite good. And then we look at the fabulous Rutland Villa. I do have a bias here. That enabled lots of volunteers to be involved with ULAS. But how do we ensure that the value, the organisations that help facilitate this are recognised? We already know that ULAS and the Historic England on-site archaeologists absolutely love the volunteers. And but to help us recruit more, I've got the corporate comms here from Historic England. Why can't we have tagged the individual groups? The History Society provided 900 hours worth of volunteers, and yet they were a homogenous volunteers. That would have helped increase membership, which is declining. There's a national, not crisis yet, of membership declining. It would have influenced people to join. I think if we translate it into money, it would help the corporate comms realise the value. And then what happens when your skill sets are increased from grassroots level, so you effectively become a professional volunteer? Do you pay it back? Do you give back to the community which upskilled you to a professional level? Or do you just ask to be paid for the professional that you are? Do you use the challenges you experience, such as no one saying thank you, to change your behaviour, or when a lot of you turned up and they went, we don't really need you now? Or do you reach saturation point of being a volunteer, especially if you're still working? And this is real wrestling, I think, the type of grassroots wrestling. When we look at early careers people who call out at the CEFA conference that they're volunteering to upskill, why should they do this when in most other professions you get paid to train? And working free rather than a different type of engagement brings me on to the lack of kudos in the sector and comments from the media in the last few weeks. It's not all volunteers are taking our jobs rhetoric. So when the latest CEFA, Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, published their comments on salary and not having a minimum salary. One of the comments was, you might as well give it to kids and old people then. Not saying that kids and old people haven't got the skill, but they're doing it for free. And then I was reading another one. I've anonymised all these, but I have asked permission for some. I spent a few hours for free on that peer review, and there it is behind a £150 paywall. I can't even have access to the article. And then the David Bowie Museum recently put an advert out for, I think it was 22 to 25 grand in a city, London. And somebody said, you need a second income to do this, otherwise it's just volunteer expenses. And then a Maverick community group who run their own site, and they're really good, but then they sent something around saying, do you know anyone who is qualified to oversee a dig who's either free or low cost? And that totally devalues the profession. And then a few weeks ago, we were at a fantastic lecture, and there were lots of us volunteers there, some who volunteered for 5 weeks on a particular project, and the lecturer said that they were going to be publishing their article, and somebody put their hand up and said, is this available for us mere mortals? And they were told, no, you have to have an academic email or you'll have to pay for it. And yet that person had given 5 weeks of free labour. They had learnt a lot, but they helped gain that knowledge and bring it to the public. Why can't that person have it? I'm going to look at the challenges now. I was told by a colleague, don't make it too negative, but I think this needs addressing. So there are a lot of inequalities in volunteering as well as the positive side. As an individual, you shouldn't just do it because you think you ought to. You should say, is it right for me? And do due diligence for yourself. And as an organisation, you could say, how can we enable? And when I say organisation, I don't mean that English Heritage or Historic England or ULAS. I mean the small community groups as well. So when we look at the basic requirement of costs, you need a computer or access to emails, in which case you need a mobile phone or the internet. You need literacy or aided literacy to understand the correspondence, because that's the only way that you receive it. As discussed earlier, you may be excluded from reports, and the latest Public User Needs Survey is currently examining the use of publications by the community and hopefully resulting in recommendations for optimising their dissemination, so there won't be any of this, you can't have it. You need transport, you need a car and fuel and car parking, and I'm not unusual in that I did 1,000 miles volunteering last year in car parking. I don't get reimbursed for it. Or you need to be on a bus route if you haven't got a car. You need costs, and there's sort of exclusivity of where that site is. You need to be able as well. I think that if you're going out onto site, there's very few sites that consider different abilities, especially at grassroots level, and sometimes even at the larger levels. When we did the Rutland Villa site, a lot of the people who volunteered from the History Society didn't want to dig, but they were amazing find specialists. So they were catered for. They didn't want to dig, they had their gazebo and all the tools needed, and they contributed that way. And they said that they didn't know that they would be allowed to do that, but they were valuable people. And then there's the time. There's a fear of missing out if you don't get involved in all of it, and some of the dates don't fit in. And there's examples of volunteers who are amazing, missing out on courses because the organisation changed this. At one museum, this meant that only retired males could do the training because they had no family ties, and others had caring duties in the school holidays, and they never volunteered in the school holidays. But the person organising the training made it easier, so it excluded most of the volunteers. And then we look at safety. The statistics of sexism in the profession shared by Kate Hawkins and other organisations, including Prospect, shows that different organisations have pretty much the same results. Some are quite poor, but there's no data on voluntary groups. There is a template code of conduct in the Badger Respect Guide, but not many volunteers have even heard of that. They've never even heard of the Chartered Institute, and they again have a code of conduct of registered organisations, but not much for voluntary groups. I have examples of people being followed home, unwanted advances, and there's no means of dealing with this. no one, when they are joining a volunteering scheme, such as an excavation, when it's at lower community level, as in there's no professional templates in place, are asked if they've got a criminal record or are asked for references. If you look at the Scouts recently as well, there's been a really massive court case where they were told they were putting lives at risk. The judge said there was no accountability at grassroots level, and also that policies were inadequately understood at grassroots level, and although safety policies existed, they weren't implemented. My question is, are we using free labour too much, or is there a fabulous dynamic where the volunteers get what they want and the person who wants volunteers is not being exploited for aiding in their requirement? And there's far more that I could say, and I doubt that there'll be loads that I've missed. But I wanted to show you the breadth, but also the respect that should be given to volunteers. And with really great management of them, it brings out the underestimated value and also gives volunteers the confidence to say, this is what I want to get as a volunteer, and know when you're not achieving that. And to those who require volunteers to consider best practice, so that when the question of can you just give me a few hours is done, the answer should be pretty straightforward. And there's going to be further discussion on, no doubt, at CIFA conference in April, Beyond the Dig, that's being run by Duncan Coe. And there's lots of brilliant people there who are professional and volunteers as well, who's going to be part of that. So the debate continues. And so, to not be contradictory and so a hypocrite, I would like to thank all the professionals and volunteers who mentored and upskilled me so I could give this talk. Okay.
Thanks for that talk. It was great. I was really struck by in your examples with Hallerton and Rutland and the kind of caretaking and prevention side of things, the contrast between the kind of direct action approach in Hallerton and the more waiting for institutions to respond for years in Rutland. And I just wondered how you might see that difference play out in dealing with some of the challenges we talked about at the end as well, the kind of challenges in having a safe and respectful environment at the grassroots level. Do you see a kind of direct action route and then institutional frameworks?
Yeah, there's different types of groups, and I chose those specifically because at Hallerton, there's a committee, but the whole membership of the committee, and so when they meet up, there's like a direct action, and they don't like being called activists, but and at Rutland, it's committee-led, so the members and volunteers there who might do something are quite passive, so it's quite challenging to see the different ways. So I think you can identify, like a typology, I suppose, but without being disrespectful of how a group is managed, to see how the institutional side is respectful. Well, it's not that Hallerton are disrespectful, but they're just more proactive. But at the Rutland History Society, they have a member of the local authority on there, and so you're guided by what can and cannot they do, and it's the capacity as well. So at Hallerton, a lot of the people there, with it being just a small village, have got more capacity, and Rutland is a county-wide, so it depends on time as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I really was engaged by your talk. And in fact, I'd like to talk to you later. But if, say, somebody wanted to volunteer, had experience volunteering in other spaces, where would they get started? Because in my experience, like smaller groups are great if you're already part of the group, but getting involved with the group, it can be a little insular.
Yeah, I've just been asked to repeat the question online. So how do you get involved in a group? Because some of them are quite insular. The Council for British Archaeology, obviously I'm biased, because they have regional groups. So the Council for British Archaeology East Midlands, they obviously cover 5 counties, and they're not necessarily small, but they have a great networking. So there's people in most of the counties who will introduce you, and their behaviours are, if you go in there, you are welcomed, what's your interest, and it's not an interview and it's not a grilling, it's subtle. We've sort of, because when I joined there, nobody spoke to me, and when I went on the committee, because Elaine Jones, who was there, said, right, you've got to go on it, you're going to represent us, and I didn't really have much choice. And so I thought, I'm going to say, you know, when people come, it'd be really good if you could just welcome them. And I went, oh, I just thought everybody knew everybody. And in the smaller groups, well, the groups in Leicestershire and Rutland, they are really friendly. But I think you need to research the groups to find out what it is you want to do or what it is you want to offer. Because if you're going to get fed up in their first 2 weeks, it's not good for either of you. And you think, or if you just want to go as a passive person to listen to what the group do first of all, and then join later on. So that's what I do. I like go as a secret agent in the back, secret shopper, and sit in the back and find out how it's gone to see if that's going to work for me. And I've left various groups because I can no longer offer them, and it's just saturating time. So that's what happens. So I think you have to do your research, and that's what happened with Kirsty actually. So I was here at the research seminar a few weeks ago, and Kirsty was saying about volunteering because she works outside the sector, and I'm just picking on her. I said, well, what do you need? She says, I need people with castles, I need to network, and I also want to learn more about my area. So I suggested she speak to the East Midlands crew and to have a trial at one of their meetings, because if they're as dull as dishwasher, you don't want to be part of it. But she is part of it now. Now she's secretary. They managed to poke her in quite quickly, and she says she's loving it. She's really enjoying it.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions in the room?
Ben.
I thought the idea of like tracking volunteers and the way that students are sort of tracked throughout, I think that's really interesting. Like, would be amazing if we can do it. How do you think it would be? How possible would it be to go back to those volunteer projects which have already happened or already started? So like the Hallaton group has been around for 20 years, because you're kind of having to rely on people's memory of when, 20 years ago they started. How viable do you think that would be?
Well, I don't know if people online can hear, but it's looking at retrospective evaluation. So what I'm going to do is an oral history project. So firstly, I'm really lucky because Colin Hyde from the East Midlands Oral History said they interviewed a load of them when the project started, and so their voices are already there. And so if I'm careful with my questions and have a real good think about it, I think retrospectively it won't be a tick box, it will be more of a narrative. And then that narrative, I think, will inform future ways in which you do it. Because as I said, when I'm looking at social network theory, you know yourself, how many people do you know just by being in your job? And if I had to map every one of those relationships, it's going to be quite challenging. But if I can get cells of where these people are, especially in Leicestershire and Rutland with all the groups, then I might be able to do some kind of linking and say, who are the influences? Who, like Elaine, was a huge mentor for over 50 people? What did they see in that value that Elaine showed? So I'm only like a few months in, and I'm trying to think about it in the best way possible. But quite a few people on the PhD course who are in the social sciences at the NHS, when we were looking at our projects, some of theirs are the same as mine, but looking at patients. So I'm going to have a chat with them and find out what they do and try and find best practice. And that's what I'm going to try.
Comments or questions in the room? Oh, yeah, that's
Community Archaeology. Are you going to, just a thing about the infrastructure, because obviously with like Leicestershire, there's a really good infrastructure for community archaeology and kind of volunteering. But in other counties, that's not Northamptonshire, but also other places, it's not necessarily the same. Is that something you're going to kind of potentially look into, and how much that, because you work for the ZBA across the whole of the country, so there must be sort of really shining areas and then areas where there's a bit more of a black hole.
There are. Ben just asked about different areas which weren't as prolific in heritage volunteering as Leicestershire and Rutland. So the Community Heritage Initiative that Leicestershire and Rutland ran all those years ago is a fantastic model. What it did was it allowed heritage wardens for every village and recruited them, and they were aligned with the parish councils. So I don't know if anybody knows, but in parish councils, and every county has parish councils, and they have a parish council forum where every individual who's associated with the parish council sends a representative to these parish councils. And so you have all these people from the county in a room for 10 minutes flat where you can advertise, and that's how they did it. And then they had heritage wardens, and the legacy of that is amazing. It's so amazing that people still think they are heritage wardens. And we had training packs. I am a product of being a heritage warden. I had no skills in archaeology whatsoever. And I was doing a GCSE, and I saw Pete Liddell, and he said, this is as an adult, you need to go on the heritage forum, and we'll train you, and you'll meet loads of people, and we'll upskill you. Peter Liddell's a community archaeologist, retired, who's heavily involved and has been a massive influence on people. And when I look at all the people, many of whom are doing postgraduate qualifications here, I think that is a really good model. So they don't have to reinvent something, you just have to reuse it and see the initiatives that they had. And it was at a little cost as well on the infrastructure. And then those people use their network to go into their own parishes and then bring people to your art.
Unknown user. I think it was in response to your retrospective comments. So where numerous organisations are involved in a project like Rutland, balancing all of their various agendas in a single social media post is pretty tricky. Supporting and encouraging active participation is part of higher education strategy, and was mentioned further down that same thread. Unfortunately, we couldn't tag everyone involved, but because there were so many, but this is a good challenge for future projects.
Yeah, I thought somebody would say, because it does mention volunteers, but again, it just says the volunteers, that was just one post, but later on, it was just something that we picked up. So yeah, I do take that on board, that they can only do one, but other organisations are mentioned in that thread. They tag a lot of others. So it was just a comment to think in future, not a major sort of my life is now over because of it. But yeah, I fully appreciate that as well.
And I've got one. This is the start of your PhD in practice. Where would you like things to be at the end? Sort of what's your goal for this?
Well, the PhD in practice is part dissertation and part project based. So I'd like to have implemented something project based, similar to what Ben was saying, and sort of influence that. I'm going to be looking at what it costs to volunteer as well. So I'm hoping that ULAS will pilot what it costs for them to do outreach and volunteering in the actual onboard costs, even though a lot of people volunteer, so that you can see the value, but also try and do something like with narrative, the oral histories, and just try and demonstrate, so you can see, because I use cartoons and things like that, try and use some graphics to try and see how the networks work, and hopefully that will help people share their knowledge even more, but also have respect for people who are professional to volunteer, and for volunteers to feel empowered by seeing others who have done the same thing.
That's great. I see someone's typing online, so I'll just let that simmer over a moment. Do we have any final questions in the room before we wrap it up for the evening? It's always very daunting. There we go. Just a comment, not a question, from Emma Stockley. I couldn't have done my fieldwork without an amazing team of volunteers. They collectively gave me almost 1,000 hours of their time when I was doing my PhD fieldwork. So it's sort of just reinforcing what we're talking
brilliant.
about.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, everyone. We are going to head to the Old Horse after, if anyone wants to continue discussions in the pub. But yeah, once again, another round of applause for Debbie.